I'm seriously thinking the West might be going down, like a gunslinger grown old and careless, or a prizefighter past his prime and living on past glories. It happens to the best, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, with the arrival of a new sheriff in town, or a contender with the core strength to soak up the punishment until yesterday's man uses up his old moves, exhausting himself in the process. George Foreman was the undisputed world heavyweight boxing champion until he faced Muhammad Ali in the Rumble in the Jungle in a stadium in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo in the October of 1974. Ali leant on the ropes, absorbing Foreman's ineffectual punches until the champ was spent and ripe for the fall that came in the eighth. An Ali left hook brought Foreman's head up into position for a straight right to the face. None of the commentators saw it coming, talking all the time about the imminent threat of a one-punch knockout from the champ. As Foreman pirouetted loosely to the canvas, Ali hovered above, right hand cocked but elegantly withheld, the punch not thrown because the former champ was done anyway. There might be an omen in remembering a hitherto undefeated, undisputed heavyweight falling to the canvas under an African sky. Australian journalist John Pilger has written recently about how propaganda has propped up America, furnishing a reputation as the good guy, while all the while the truth was that that erstwhile paragon of virtue has been a common or garden bully. So much of what has happened over the decades, always in the name of the West, has been spun and manipulated by propaganda. In a piece entitled Silencing the Lambs, Pilger pointed out that 9 of the top 10 media companies is based in the USA, along with the social media heavyweights. While the US, the West and NATO have gone about their business, those media companies have held their coats. Pilger records how over the course of his lifetime the US has, quote, overthrown or attempted to overthrow more than 50 governments around the world, most of them democracies, interfered in democratic elections in 30 countries, dropped bombs on the people of 30 countries, most of them poor and defenceless. It has attempted to murder the leaders of 50 countries. It has fought to suppress liberation movements in 20 countries, end quote. Pilger's testimony reads less like the career of a hero fighter and more like the rap sheet of a gangster. I have loved the thought of America all my life, watched the movies, listened to the music. I still love the idea of America, of a land of free people pursuing happiness. America's full of good people, just as Britain is full of good people, just as the world is populated in the main by good people who just want peace, peace with their neighbours so they can get about the decent, honourable business of raising families. Make no mistake, life in the West has been a wonder for hundreds of millions of people, a world in which things work, of people mostly entitled to equality before the law, a world mostly of tolerance and plenty. No wonder other millions want to come. The people of the West are not the problem. People like you and people like me, as US musician Oliver Anthony sings in his protest song that speaks for the world. The problem has been generations of increasingly corrupt leaders and their corporate masters bent on profit and dominance for themselves and their own. But the world is going through a time of change. We feel it. During a time of change, anything might happen, including good things. In seeking to have it all for themselves and to deny the plenty to the many, the corrupt few have inadvertently unleashed something they can't control, which is the determination of millions to defend the lives they have had. In pushing for change that suits themselves, the few have exposed their true natures, and we see them. He that troubleth his own house shall inherit the wind, as it says in the good book. I wonder more and more if the old champ still has it in the legs. I watch the West, watch our latest clumsy moves, and wonder if we've grown punchy and vulnerable. The West still has it in the lips, if not in the hips, still up for forever fights like the one in Ukraine. That tussle was meant to bring Russia to her knees. Instead, it exposes corruption and hypocrisy. We've seen, too, an alliance forged between Russia and China that has in turn emboldened so many others. This week, a host of nations gathered in Johannesburg in South Africa for the latest BRICS summit. The BRICS countries have been Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Now 6 more, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are invited to join in January. Chinese Premier Xi Jinping said the expansion of BRICS would further strengthen the force for world peace and development. Fancy that, Xi of China owning the source of peace for the world. Vladimir Putin addressed the conference via video link and said the neoliberalism of the West was a danger to traditional values in developing countries. Who would have seen that coming? The day when the West was lectured by Vladimir Putin about the importance of traditional values, the West being accused of posing the greatest threat to those values. No one predicts BRICS will supersede the West just yet, not today and not tomorrow, but more and more of the world's enormous producers of energy are seated or hovering around the BRICS table. What happens next? Those countries with 40% of the world's population trading among themselves, not in the US dollar, but in their own currencies, or one alternative currency, backed by their own bank. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa told the delegates BRICS already accounted for a quarter of the global economy, a fifth of global trade. He said Africa was a source of the minerals of the world's technological future, rich in lithium, uranium, vanadium, cobalt, platinum, palladium, nickel, copper, rhodium. It's not just in economic and military terms that the West, NATO, looks increasingly exhausted, across which is spreading the shadow of an unwritten tomorrow. Those craven coat holders of the media, the newspapers, the rest of the mainstream dinosaurs, even the erstwhile totalitarian control wielded by the new social media titans, looks outmanoeuvred, played at their own game. US journalist Tucker Carlson hosted Donald Trump in front of an online audience numbering in the tens of millions at least, if not the hundreds of millions. Podcaster Joe Rogan routinely commands an audience the relic media can only dream of. All over the online world, fresh contenders are on the move. From here in the UK, Russell Brand speaks to millions. The BBC and the rest are reeling from blows they never saw coming. The world is on the cusp of change. What happens to the West, to the world, if the collective called BRICS emerges in time as an alternative G7 or G20? What happens if the West continues to demonise oil and gas while the BRICS nations wallow in the wealth of the huge percentage they control? The unique selling point of the West used to be the observance of the rule of law, due process. The rest of the world no longer sees the West that way. Jailing political opponents like banana republics is in the playbook of the West. The silencing of journalists who challenge authority and authoritarianism, Julian Assange among them, is in the playbook of the West. Capitalism, an imperfect system but arguably the least worst, that has lifted more people out of poverty and towards prosperity than any other, is warped by a handful of Western oligarchs so that they and only they make money, unimaginable amounts of money. Those oligarchs seek to force neo-colonialism on the wider world, in African countries among others, while pushing for neo-feudalism at home. You'll own nothing and be happy. As a consequence, money, wealth that used to flow towards banks in London, Paris, in the US, might stay where it's made, in Asia, in India, in Africa, in the Middle East. The rise of BRICS is the rise of proof that the rest of the world increasingly finds it has better things to do with its wealth and therefore its influence. Voices our leaders don't want to hear predict the emergence of a multipolar world where the word of the West matters less. Addressing the conference in Joburg, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said the dynamism of the world's economy was in the global south and that BRICS was its driving force. He said Africa, predicted to be the world's most populous continent by 2100, was building a free trade zone of 54 countries. Empires rise and fall, champions come and go, overtaken by time and hubris. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that it's not what people say that matters, but what they do. Talk can be cheap and the ripe stink of corruption is everywhere. But right now some of the best lines are coming not from the West, but from elsewhere. Lula of Brazil told representatives of his fellow BRICS nations that in just a few years we have left behind a scenario of benign multipolarity towards one that resumes the obsolete mentality of the Cold War and geopolitical competition. He said, an increasing number of countries, among them the BRICS countries, are engaged in making direct contact with Moscow and Kiev in pursuit of peace for Ukraine. He said BRICS nations can't remain indifferent to the deaths and destruction that increase every day, and that many other conflicts and crises do not receive due attention, even though they cause vast suffering to their populations. Haitians, Yemenis, Syrians, Libyans, Sudanese and Palestinians all deserve to live in peace. He said it's unacceptable that global military spending in a single year exceeds $2 trillion, while FAO tells us that 735 million people go hungry every day in the world. He said the search for peace is a collective duty and an imperative for fair and sustainable development. Here's the thing, who knows what comes next for the West, where we have lived, where there has been so much decent aspiration by so many decent people. Let's hope there's a way forward for the West. But aspiration towards prosperity is the right of all. Surely at the very least, we all deserve to live in peace. The title of champion of the world is up for grabs.